So the title for this message is Reason and Imagination for Theology and Preaching. And I'm going to guess that many of you probably who came because of the title, it was the word imagination that probably drew you, knowing the crowd that we're in. So we'll spend more time on that. Given that I've been living in the world of C.S. Lewis for the last few years, writing another book on Lewis, I'm going to take him as my launching point. And so here's my rough outline, what I want to do. First, I want to distinguish reason and imagination. What's the difference? What do we mean by these terms, reason and imagination? And then I want to talk about how each of them relates to theology and how each of them relates to preaching, and then close it out with some practical helps about how we can cultivate, especially the imagination side, in our ministries. So let's start there with those definitions. For Lewis, reason is the faculty of the mind that analyzes, distinguishes, and abstracts. It uses logic to make deductions, to draw conclusions, to take things apart so that we can look at them individually. Reason breaks things down into their component parts. It's like you parse the forest into all of the individual trees and look at each one of them separately. It isolates, it disassembles, it deconstructs. The product of reasoning, what happens after we reason, the thing that we produce is arguments. We produce arguments, which are basically a succession of linked concepts. So one statement followed by another statement, followed by another statement, all of them linked with therefores and so that's and in order tos, and so those are the product. That's what we produce after we've reasoned, and that's evidence that we show to other people that we've actually thought about something. That's what reason does. Imagination, on the other hand, loves to embrace its object completely. Okay? Imagination wants to take things in a single glance, not parsing them out, but to see something as harmonious, symmetrical, and self-explanatory. Imagination loves to lose itself in a labyrinth, to surrender to the inextricable. Imagination doesn't fixate on the individual trees, it revels and exults in the forest. It looks at a landscape and says, that's beautiful, and when you say, what makes it beautiful, imagination can only point. Just all of that. All of that. There's no one thing. It's not merely the colors. It's not merely the smells. It's not merely the different aspects of the landscape. It's the whole thing taken in with all of its realness, hitting you at once in your imagination. That's what makes it beautiful and makes your heart go, yes. Now, imagination, of course, is not just directed at real landscapes. It can also attend to things that aren't real. So imagination can shuffle the deck a little bit, take universals taken from the real world, and so you can take a very short Englishman, give him large hairy feet and a voracious appetite, and boom, hobbit. You can put a horn on a horse, and you got a unicorn. So the imagination deals with not just what is, but what might be, what could be. Not just with reality, but with fiction. And if reason produces arguments as its result, after you've reasoned, you can produce an argument on a page. Imagination produces images as we imagine a scene. So if I say the city of Carthage, or if I say Lucy visiting Tumnus's house, or if I say ransom on the floating islands of Paralandra, some of you probably don't know that last one. But if I say those, certain images kind of flit across your mind. You don't settle on one of them, you don't just camp, but imagination loves to have a sequence of images just kind of flashing across the mind, and the whole purpose of them is not to camp on any one image, but is to give a quality. Okay, to give a certain kind of quality of a thing, taking it in that single glance. It's the imagination that grasps what I mean when I say the Minnesotaness of Minnesota. And anybody who lives here kind of, or maybe even if you don't, you visit here once a year for PASCON, and you come and you're like, yeah, there's something about that place. There's a certain quality and feel, and it's generally speaking has to do with cold. Because you come in the really awful time of the year, right? This is the White Witches time of the year. It's always winter. It's never Christmas. That's where we are right now. Or the quality of the homeliness of childhood memories. That sense of nostalgia that you have, that's what imagination gives you as you kind of think back on your childhood and certain images start to come to mind, and there's a quality about them. Imagination is the faculty that receives that and revels in that. Now, Lewis associates reason with the intellect and with thought, and imagination with the heart and the emotions. Reason focuses on the abstract, the universal. Imagination on the concrete and the particular. Reason distances itself from an object in order to analyze it. Imagination submits to the object in order to imbibe its quality. The danger with reason is that in order to analyze and abstract, we have to kill the object that we're analyzing. So he said, we murder to dissect. Reason can kill things because you want to take it all apart. You take a frog, you kill the frog, and you cut open the frog to see what's inside the frog. That's what reason does. Imagination doesn't kill no frogs. The danger with imagination is that because it targets our emotions, we can easily be swept away by false imaginations. Untethered from reason and truth, we can believe and embrace and love things that are false and wrong. Now, one final note by way of definition. Lewis says, reason is the organ of truth, and imagination is the organ of meaning. So reason is the organ of truth, imagination is the organ of meaning, and imagination is the prerequisite for evaluating truth. So we've got to pause there and think about what he means. So, in other words, before we can know whether something is true or false, we have to know what it means. What are we even talking about? And it's imagination that supplies the meaning. And to show how it does so, we need to take a little bit of a detour and think about how God has made the world and how nature, how creation reveals God. So let's talk about how creation reveals God. The Bible tells us that creation does reveal God. Psalm 19, verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. His invisible attributes, namely his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So just follow me there in Romans 1, verse 20. Made things make invisible attributes visible. Created things make the Creator's qualities perceivable. In the rustling grass, I hear him pass. He speaks to me everywhere. But how does creation reveal God? Lewis argues that what we really get from nature is an iconography, or a language of images. In other words, a beautiful sunset or this idyllic moment at a lakeside can't tell us what to believe. It doesn't tell us what's true and false. To discover that, we need reason, we need philosophy, we need theology. That's what tells us what's true and false. But what a lakeside scene can give us is it can give us a language of images to clothe and incarnate our beliefs. It can't give us truth, but it can give us meaning. So listen to Lewis here. Nature never taught me that there exists a God of glory and of infinite majesty. I had to learn that in other ways. But nature gave the word glory a meaning for me. I still do not know where else I could have found one. I do not see how the fear of God could have ever meant to me anything but the lowest prudential effort to be safe, if I had never seen certain ominous ravines and unapproachable crags. If nature had never awakened certain longings in me, huge areas of what I can now mean by the love of God, love for God, the love of God would never, so far as I can see, have existed. So nature is what gives us these qualities. It can't tell us whether the statement God is powerful and God is glorious is true or false. It doesn't verify theological or metaphysical propositions. But what nature can do is help show what those statements mean. Because we've experienced nature, because we've experienced creation, because we've seen a tornado tear across the sky or stood at the top of a mountain at sunset, we know what the words powerful and glorious mean. Through nature, we have experiential knowledge which creates categories in our mind for knowing and loving God. This is because everything that God has made has some likeness to himself. Space, matter, vegetable life, animal life, fertility of insects, the affection of mammals, rationality of man, all of these provide little windows into what God is like. And so because of this, nature and imagination can initiate us into the spiritual life. Our imaginative experiences can become a stepping stone when we begin to recognize the likeness or pattern between the lower world of nature and the higher world of God, between creation and the God who reveals himself in it. Now, we could go on there and talk more about reason and imagination and how that relates to things like faith, and temptation and the Christian life, but we're talking here particularly about theology and preaching. So let's think about how reason and imagination can serve our God talk, theology, and the particular kind of God talk that we herald from the pulpit. So in an essay entitled The Language of Religion, Lewis gives some tentative thoughts on language in general and how we speak about our religious lives. He begins by distinguishing three forms of speech, all of them kind of existing on a spectrum. So on one side, you've got scientific speech. On the far other end of the spectrum, you've got poetical speech, and in the middle, you have ordinary speech. Okay? Scientific goes with reason, poetic goes with imagination. And he notes that both scientific and poetical speech are improvements upon ordinary speech. They're particular kinds of improvements on ordinary speech. So scientific speech improves ordinary speech through precision and abstraction. Okay, so it changes an ordinary statement like, it's very cold outside, into a quantitative statement about the precise temperature. It's 30 degrees or whatever it is, 13 degrees below zero. Whatever the precise number is, very cold becomes something very precise when you move in the scientific direction. On the other hand, poetical speech improves it in a different direction. The aim of poetical speech is to give the listener a certain quality or sense of an object. So take Christina Rossetti's Christmas poem, In the Bleak Midwinter. Okay? In the bleak midwinter, frosty wind made moan, earth stood hard as iron, water like a stone, snow had fallen, snow on snow, snow on snow, in the bleak midwinter long ago. Now that poem gives us a number of pregnant adjectives that give us a quality. Bleak, frosty, moan, earth as iron, water as stone, and then snow on snow on snow on snow. And all of these give you a certain image, a certain quality of what that scene is like and what we're talking about. And poetic speech, while it may arouse the emotions, its purpose is not merely subjective. It seeks to give us real knowledge of what that scene is like through ample use of adjectives, descriptions that awaken our senses. So if you think about this, the scientific description, it's 13 degrees below zero, is meaningless to you unless you've experienced it. And then you have some frame of reference to go, I've been in 30 degrees, and so 13 degrees below zero sounds really, really cold. Okay? There's sometimes actually, like I think over the Christmas break, I got back from out of town. I left Texas for Christmas, visiting family. It was about 80 degrees when we left Texas in December. Got back, it was 30 degrees. And within a week, it was negative 20, negative 30, something like that. And so, and I was just marveling, like the gap between Texas and Minnesota on my arrival was the same between Minnesota when I got here and Minnesota a week later. Like that's the same spread of digits. And at some point, you don't really, it doesn't process that. You're just like, it's cold. That's all you think is it's cold. But those quantitative statements mean nothing. Some of you have not been here whenever it's negative 20, negative 30, and they don't mean it. You just think, man, I know what it's like out there right now, and I'm from Atlanta, and this is terrible, right? So the scientific description doesn't mean anything unless you've had the experience. However, if I told you it is bitterly cold, if you walk outside, your hands will hurt, almost like you've put them in scalding hot water. Okay? Even if you've never been in the cold, you have some idea of what that would be like, and you have a better sense of the real experience of being outside. So the whole point is, poetry doesn't just give you emotion, subjectivity. It gives you reality. It can give you a real quality. Now, poetic speech then is a real medium of information. And so Lewis says, now where does religious language, God talk, where does it belong? Normally, it occupies some space between ordinary and poetical speech, okay? Religious statements, Lewis says, we can improve them in a scientific direction. This is the language of formal or academic theology. So when you say something like, I believe in God, okay, that's ordinary speech, I believe in God. If you want to say that in a scientifically precise way, and if you want to move that direction, you can say, I believe in incorporeal entity. Personal in the sense that it can be the subject and object of love on which all other entities are unilaterally dependent. Okay? That's what I believe in God means. And so this would be, Lewis has an analogy at one place where he says, theology is like a map. Okay, theology is like a map. In the same way that a map is to reality, is to a countryside, as theology is to God. So the whole purpose of a map is to help you navigate the countryside, to be able to say, I need to go this way to get to that place. I need to go this way to get to that place. That's the purpose of a map. So theology is like a map to God, and we can draw very technical maps with our academic theology. And why would we do that? Why would we draw such a technical map? Well, we do it for things like instruction, for clarification, in the midst of controversy. Situations like that, we need really technical, rational, scientific-like maps in order to be clear about what we mean about God. But, this is really important, abstraction and precision is not the language that religion naturally speaks, and thank God for that. Religion, because it deals with the most concrete thing in reality, namely God, naturally moves toward the poetical. Our sermons and our hymns, and indeed most of the scriptures, always use the poetic and imaginative language, metaphors, similes, imagery, parables, illustrations. God is a sun and a shield. He is a consuming fire. He hides us underneath the shadow of his wings. His bowels are moved with compassion. That's the direction that religious speech most naturally wants to go. Think of your hymns. So, how do those then relate in terms of our theology? Well, the whole purpose of them is the precise theological language is meant to guard the more ordinary, common poetical language, so that we don't draw silly conclusions. So that when I say God hides us beneath the shadow of your wings, you don't think that he actually has feathers. Okay? Or that when I say that God weeps over rebellion, that we grieve the heart of God, that you don't think that he has wet tears. Okay? So and oftentimes our scientific theological statements are negatives. We want to say he's infinite, that's not finite. He's impassible, he's not subject to passions. He's immutable, he's not subject to change. Right? They're the negations that say, when we say these things positively about him, he's a consuming fire, we don't want you to make the mistake of thinking that he is oxygen and whatever the heck else goes into fire that makes fire fire. He's not actually made of that stuff. He's like that, but he's not that. And the precise statements guard us so we don't draw foolish conclusions. But it's the ordinary and the poetic language that is designed to move us, to hit our emotions and our affections, to help us feel and experience the glory and wonder and weightiness of the truth. And that's what preaching should do. Preaching should both instruct the mind and engage the heart. In fact, to borrow from Jonathan Edwards, preaching ought to raise the affections of the hearers in proportion to the value of the truth preached. So if the truth is really valuable in that abstract sense, the whole point of preaching is to help people feel how valuable it is in proportion. Big truth, you ought to feel a lot. Little truth, not as much. There ought to be a proportionality between your emotional response and the value of the truth that you're preaching. And that's why imagination is important for preaching. It's why Edwards' sermons are filled with vivid, imaginative language that is designed to engage the senses and give a different kind of clarity. So Edwards is really rational in his preaching. He's very rigorous, logical, boom, 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 one step after another in an argument. But at the end of a sermon, he doesn't want us to say, I know the truth now. I know what temperature it is outside. He wants us to say, I've tasted and seen. I've tasted and seen. And in order to do that, he's got to engage the imagination. Okay, now we could, again, talk about that more, about how reason and imagination work in guarding our theology and making it faithful. But I'm assuming that you came for more than clarification, that you came for some practical help. So that's what I want to do here in the last 15 minutes or so. So I want to give two kind of examples, mainly on the imagination side, because I'm guessing that's where a lot of us need the most work. It's where I need the most work. It's where Lewis has been most helpful. So let's just start with the basics. Let's start with illustrations. So you're pastors, most of you are pastors, and you're going to be doing illustrations. Illustrations are extended metaphors. And oftentimes we use them because we want to bring that certain kind of taste and see clarity about a particular point that we want to make. So we want people to have a taste and see moment about some point in our sermon. So for instance, I'm going to use an example from Piper. Probably all of you have heard this one. in his sermon, he's done it a lot of different times, he wants to talk about the deficiency of duty as an expression of love. Duty's not enough. It's not the highest form of love. And so he's trying to make that plain. So he's giving you argument after argument about why duty is not the highest form of love. But then, when he wants you to actually get it, what he does is he says something like this. I'm going to use my wife instead of Noelle, but because that'd be weird. I was trying to think about how am I going to do this, but I was like, I'm not going to do Noelle because that'd be weird. So imagine I come home from work on my anniversary with flowers, and I ring the doorbell, and my wife answers the door, and I say, I love you, dear. Happy anniversary, Jenny. And I hand her the flowers. And with a delighted look on her face, she says, Joe, they're beautiful. Why did you? And I say, it's my duty. Okay? Now, Piper does that, and every time people kind of do what you just did. They laugh. They laugh. Now, pause and think about why. That's it. That was the entirety of the illustration. What's the whole point? The absurdity of saying, it's my duty in a moment like that prompts the laughter because there's a moment of recognition. There's a tasting and seeing that just happened about the principle of duty is not enough when it comes to love. And it's that scene that you're into as I'm describing it, you're picturing it, and you're there, and then when those words come out of my mouth, your laughter is I get it now. I really see now that duty's not enough. So the illustration gives a particular kind of clarity. And that clarity, so when we do it, we're constructing these very carefully constructed scenarios that climax in this moment of recognition. That's what we're aiming for. And so it's like you're putting the puzzle pieces on the table, and you're starting to put it together, and when the last central piece goes in, the audience has the aha moment, at least we hope they do, and they can signal it by laughter or by tears or by a subtle nodding of the head, some way that you go, now they got it. Now they've got it. They've grasped something in an intuition, just a clear sight of it. They've taken the whole thing in, and now they know in a way that they didn't know 5 minutes ago. Something clicks. It falls into place. The truth lands on them in a new way. They see a pattern that they've never seen before. And so for my own part, this has often happened for me, most often, when I've read great works of fiction. This is why fiction is so helpful. In fact, one of the reasons I think that many pastors use Narnia and Lord of the Rings for many of their sermon illustrations is that those are some of the only books in our shared library. Right? They're the only ones that you can have some confidence that the people in your church have actually read and that you can appeal to in order to make something real. And that's kind of sad, actually. Right? There was a time when you could appeal to other books, when you could draw on lots of stuff because there was a bigger shared culture within a congregation. And one of the things you might think about is how great works of literature might serve a congregation more broadly by giving hooks, by giving concrete pictures of certain kinds of truth that can help people go, I get it now. I tell you, so when I'm a professor, and so I deal with college students a lot, but we're going through great books together. I can't tell you how helpful it is for me in counseling them through things in their life to have this vast reservoir of literary characters to draw on and say, you know what you sound like right now? You sound like Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice, or you sound like Ivan Karamazov, or you sound, I can do that, I can appeal to characters from Shakespeare as a way of doing it. Now, fundamentally, that should be Bible. In other words, the stories of the Bible ought to provide that kind of imaginative reservoir that we can draw on to help make things click for people. I don't really get envy. And then it's like, let me tell you the story of David and Saul. Let me get concrete to help you say, that's what envy does. Let me make it real for you. It's the story that helps it do that. And so a minute ago I said, nature gives us this iconography. Lewis says it gives us this language of images. Elsewhere, he says, that's what great works of literature do. Fiction gives us an iconography of images. It gives us this language with which to speak. Movies can do it, television shows can do it, and so shared culture is a way of getting that iconography on the table that resonates with us and that you can appeal to as a pastor. All right, but it's not just illustrations. Illustrations are one helpful thing, but the danger of illustrations is they can feel very clunky. I don't know if you've ever been in a sermon where it's been 25 minutes of abstract theologizing, like a lecture, and then all of a sudden the guy tries to pull out an illustration, and it's just like the disconnect between his normal ways of talking and this illustration are so striking that you're like, I don't know what to do. And you're going, I've never heard that. And your wife's going, I've heard that. mull on that one for a minute. So when we think about imagination in preaching, we don't want to think merely about these kind of bracketed illustrations or parables, but we want to think about our language in general. And so the best way I knew to do this was just to walk through a passage. I'm going to use Lewis because Lewis is a master of this. And I'm going to walk through, and I just want you to hear the poetic language in a sermon. This is Weight of Glory. You probably all read it. But I'm going to draw your attention to what he's doing with his language in hopes that maybe we can imitate it. So he's talking about longing and ache for something that we don't know, this deep, indelible longing in our souls. So here's what he says. In speaking of this desire for our own far-off country, which we find in ourselves even now. So just stop right there. Desire for our own far-off country. Right? Even that little phrase, far-off country, is meant to conjure in your mind a certain picture. And it's going to flash through your mind this fast and give you a certain quality. And then he's going to keep moving right along. And so the images are just going to come like this. But the whole point is it's going to build up in your mind a certain picture, a certain impression. I feel a certain shyness. So now you can picture Lewis kind of blushing or something. I'm almost committing an indecency. I'm trying to, listen, rip open the inconsolable secret in each one of you. There's an image. Rip open, tearing, right? He's tearing off something and trying to get at something that you're trying to hide. The secret which, listen, hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia and romanticism. So it hurts. That's sensory language. You know what pain is, and it hurts so much that you take revenge on it. So now you've got two different images just crammed together. You've got pain, right? There's a pain here, and it's the kind of pain that leads you to get back at someone. And so you take your revenge on this feeling by calling it names, by name calling. So he's conjuring a situation like a childhood, like on the playground, and he's saying, this is what you do to this little shy feeling in your gut that you want something that you don't even know. The secret also which pierces, that's pain language, that's sword language, it's cutting, but pierces with such sweetness. So now we've got juxtaposition, right? Again, two images, sword, piercing, but sweet, delightful. And it's like, he wants to do that, and he's doing it so fast that I'm stopping. We're doing reason right here. We're taking it apart and pulling everything apart. He just does it seamlessly to build up the impression in your mind. That when in very intimate conversation, the mention of it becomes imminent, we grow awkward and affect to laugh at ourselves. The secret we cannot hide and cannot tell, though we desire to do both. And so now you've got a scene of people kind of leaning together, intimate conversation, and all of a sudden that whole thing, that secret thread, that inconsolable longing is about to be brought into conversation, and everybody kind of laughs it off and gets awkward. And he wants you to be in that scene and go, you felt that. I know you felt that. I'm going to conjure that out of you by my description. And I use the word conjuring deliberately because here's what he says next. These things, beauty, memory of our past, whatever brings this longing, awakens it in us, they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. Again, boom, 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 image after image. And they're sensory, right? It's smell, it's sound, it's music. And then he says, do you think I am trying to weave a spell? So now we're in magic land, we're in fairy tale. Perhaps I am, but remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as inducing them, and you and I have need of the strongest spell that can be found to wake us from the evil enchantment of worldliness which has been laid upon us for nearly 100 years. So now you are, Prince Rillian, tied to a chair under an enchantment. That's where you live. Scientific materialism has crushed that little inner voice that says there must be more. I want, I long, I ache for a far-off country, and I've never even been there. And that whole scientific thing is an enchantment that's crushed you. And he's saying, I'm trying in this sermon to conjure out of you, to weave a different spell, to awaken you so that maybe you say, that's real too. This is real. This longing must have an object that's real. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. Listen to him describe our sense of disappointment when the longing fades. Like after that moment, that magic moment on the hillside when you see the sun setting, and it's like the universe clicks into place, and that longing erupts, and then all of a sudden you try to catch it and it just dies away. You know what I mean. For a few minutes, we have had the illusion of belonging to that world. Now we wake to find that it's no such thing. So notice waking language. It was like waking up from a beautiful dream and wanting to get back into that dream. We've been mere spectators. Beauty has smiled, but not to welcome us. Her face was turned in our direction, but not to see us. We've not been accepted, welcomed, or taken into the dance. And again, notice the image. He personifies beauty. It's a she. And she's smiling, but it's that scene, right? The movies do this a lot. We've all experienced where somebody smiles and waves at you, and you're like, oh, hey. And then it's like that guy. You know? And it's like, oh, they didn't even want us. And that disappointment in that moment, brief as it is meant to be a picture. And he's trying to say that's what we experience when the longing fades. We want something else which can hardly be put into words, to be united with this beauty that we see, to pass into it. This is metaphor too. To pass in, that's movement language. We want to pass into beauty. Or, he says, to receive it into ourselves. So now we're not moving into beauty. Beauty is moving into us. To bathe in it. Now it's like water. It's liquid beauty. To become part of it. And he just does this, bang, bang, bang. It's all imagery, it's all metaphor, it's all appealing to the imagination in order to give a certain quality. At present, we are on the outside of the world, the wrong side of the door. So again, two images. They don't make sense together. Outside of the world, wrong side of the door are very different images, but both of them give you that sense of being shut out, locked out, banging on the door, trying to get in. Please let me in. I want to come into the party. Nobody hears you. Nobody marks you. We discern the freshness and purity of morning, but they do not make us fresh and pure. We cannot mingle with the splendors we see. And notice this. But all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling with the rumor that it will not always be so. Someday, God willing, we shall get in. And notice what he did there. He could have said, all the pages of the New Testament are filled with the rumor. But he doesn't. He gives you an image. It's not just pages, they're leaves. They're leaves rustling. It's like there's a wind blow. So now, where's your mind go when you hear, but all the leaves of the New Testament are rustling, right? It's like there's a wind that's blowing, and you can't see where it's going, and you don't know, but it's like there's this rumor out there floating in the air that you can barely catch, and it's saying, someday you're in. Someday you're going to get in. That door, remember back to the first part of that paragraph? The door that you're locked out of is going to open, and somebody's going to be standing there going, come on in. Beauty. Beauty says, come on in. Bathe in me. All of those images that he's conjured, now he punches with, someday, God willing, we're going to get in. Okay. Now, none of us are going to be C.S. Lewis. Okay, so let's just lower some expectations here for a minute, all right? None of us are going to be C.S. Lewis, but we can get better. We can get better if we attend to what we're doing. So I'm going to give you one example of my own improvement. There's a section in the Things of Earth where I'm unpacking Colossians 2. It's the do not handle, do not taste, do not touch passage. They have no, that has the appearance of wisdom, no value for stopping the indulgence of the flesh. You guys know this passage? Okay. So when I was going to exposit that, I'm going to unpack it and try to make it clear for people. I want people to get what this passage is saying. So here's the sentence that I wrote first that drove me crazy because I'd read back through my manuscript and I would just get angry right here at this spot because of this sentence. Listen to it. The pursuit of sanctification through the rejection of creation has the appearance of wisdom. Say it again. The pursuit of sanctification through the rejection of creation has the appearance of wisdom. Now that statement's absolutely true. That's what the passage says. That's accurate, scientifically speaking, right? It's very accurate. But notice some of the features of that. You've got nominalizations. I've turned verbal ideas into nouns. Some of you are like, this may be, you don't do grammar, but that's okay. I'm helping you here. This is help. Nominalization is when you turn a verbal idea, like pursue, into a noun. Turn it into a noun. So the pursuit. So I've got two. Pursuit, rejection, that's reject as a noun. Appearance, that's appear as a noun, right? So there's three different nominalizations. Pursuit, rejection, appearance. There's Latinized vocabulary. So words that come from a Latin root. All of those shun words are Latin-based. Latin-based words sound very smart. It's the language that theologians and philosophers love to write in. It sounds very, very academic, okay? And I'm a professor, so there it is. It gives this very precise academic quality. The only verb in the sentence is actually the bland, simple possessive, has. But the statement's faithful. It's true. Isn't that good enough? And I said, no. It's what I want to say, but it's not what I want to say. It's an awful sentence. So it frustrated me, so I tried to fix it. So here's the revised sentence. Pursuing holiness by stiff-arming creation appears wise. Again, I was just stop and think about what I did. 3 things. I got rid of the nominalizations. Pursuit became pursue or pursuing. Appearance became appears. So get rid of the nominalizations, the nouns, and put them make the verbs do the work. Make the verbs do the work. Passing into, receiving into. Lewis makes verbs do work. So I want to make verbs do work. I introduced an image or 2 images. Pursuing holiness, so that's a chasing image. And then stiff-arming creation is just a nice colloquial, Heisman kind of image. And then I shifted the vocabulary a bit from Latinized to Anglo-Saxon. This is just a little tidbit. Anglo-Saxon words are often more guttural, real, and concrete. Okay, so if you think about the difference between the word dog and the word canine, pig and porcine or pork. Okay, so here sanctification is Latin-based, holiness is Anglo-Saxon-based, and it gives a different quality to it. Pursuing holiness versus the pursuit of sanctification. One of them sounds like it belongs in an academic treatise, and one of them sounds still a little bit higher than normal speech. It's not ordinary, because ordinary people don't talk about holiness. But it's moving in the poetic direction because there's an image, and holy isn't the same kind of word as sanctity. Now, it's still not a great sentence. Like, this is not a world-class sentence, but it's better than the old sentence. That's the point. This was me trying to say, you don't have to become C.S. Lewis, okay? But just get a little bit better by thinking about it. And the best way I know to grow in this area is as you read or as you listen to sermons, when a pastor gives a sentence that lands on you or a paragraph that lands on you, you need to capture that one, right? Put online or whatever, or write it down and think about it. And think about, why did it hit me? What's in there? Notice the metaphors. Notice the images. Notice the language. Notice what verbs are doing the work. And think about it. Take it apart so that you can try to emulate it the next time you get up to preach. I want to conclude. I think I've got a little bit of time with kind of something to bring it together. So I want to talk about Psalm 19. I mentioned heavens declare the glory of God. If you ask people, how do the heavens declare the glory of God? 9 times out of 10, they will say, through their size and majesty. That's how the heavens declare the glory of God, through their size and majesty. The heavens are so vast, they remind us of how small we are. And the beauty of a sunset or a starry sky is so magnificent that it points to the beauty of God. And those are good answers. But if you read the passage in Psalm 19, listen to what it says. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man runs its course with joy. So here's how the heavens declare the glory of God. The sun is like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, like a strong man who runs his course with joy. There's 2 images there. One's a wedding day. We would probably change it if you were going to make this real. You'd be picturing the groom standing at the front of the aisle right before the doors open. And he's probably bouncing a little bit like this. And there's a big smile on his face, an expectation. And he's like, here it is. I've been waiting. That, he says, that's what the sun looks like. He looks at the sun and he says, I've seen this before. I remember at that wedding of that guy, I remember the look on his face, and the sun moving across the sky reminded me of his face on his wedding day. And then he said, no, I've seen it someplace else too. I remember one time when Joshua-Basshebeth, who's one of the mighty men, is running into battle with his spear up, and he's got this determined but happy look on his face. He's a warrior heading into battle, and he was built for this. He's like, I was made to protect. I was made to fight. And that look on his face, that reminds me of the sun. The sun is like the bridegroom. The sun is like a warrior. And those images together say, this is the glory of God. The heavens are saying that. It's a web of images that show us how. The sun is bright and triumphant. The bridegroom's face is shining as he stands at the aisle. The warrior is intense but joyful because he's doing what he was built to do. And in all of those cases, it's experiences from outside the Bible that help us to know what the Bible means. If you've never been to a wedding, the verse doesn't mean anything to you. If you've never seen a warrior running into battle with that determined joy, the verse doesn't mean anything to you. You can't even evaluate whether it's true because you don't know what it means if you've never seen the sun. Notice something else. I've had an idea about this for a while. At some point I'm going to try it out, about a sermon on masculinity built on Psalm 19. What's masculine? Because most of the images there are masculine images, right? Bridegroom and warrior. The bride. So how do I want the men in my church to get this principle? Here's the definition. I think it's from Doug Wilson at some point. Masculinity is the glad assumption of sacrificial responsibility. Notice the nominalizations? Glad assumption of sacrificial responsibility. Very precise, clear, reasonable. Now, I want to make that real for guys. And so I'm saying, here's what masculinity is like. Okay? I want you to think about the ecstasy that a guy feels on his wedding day. That's what masculinity is like. I want you to see a man when he's protecting somebody that he loves and he's fighting to the death to save them. That's what masculinity is like. When the sun blazes across the sky, high noon, just moving, bright with no clouds in the sky, that's what masculinity is like. And that image is the brightness, the triumph, the joy, all of that, that's the glad assumption of sacrificial responsibility. Do you get it now? And I want it to click. And I'm probably going to go to other images. I'm going to go to Narnia, and I'm going to say, King Loon says, this is what it means to be a king, to be first in every desperate attack, to be last in every desperate retreat. You got my warrior, Joshua-Basshebeth, running into battle? And when there's hunger in the land, as must be now and again in bad years, they come, to wear finer clothes and to laugh louder at a scantier meal than any man in your land. And then I'm probably going to say, there's this movie. You ever seen Cinderella Man? You ever seen that, that scene where Jimmy Braddock is at home and his daughter says, Mama, I want Samoa. And she's hungry because they don't have enough food. And Jimmy says, hey, you know what? I had a dream last night that I ate a huge steak and potatoes. I'm full. Take mine. And I just want to cry. I'm like, that's what manhood is. That picture for me, right, of a dad saying, you can have my food. Because there's hunger in the land. There's lean times, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to laugh louder. I'm going to do tickle fight afterward, even though my stomach is dying. That's masculinity. And that's what the heavens are declaring. And all of this, wrap it back up here, all of this lands on Jesus, doesn't it? Because Jesus has a face that's shining like the sun in its full strength. Jesus is a bridegroom who greatly rejoices over his bride. Jesus is a warrior who, for the joy set before him, ran his race and finished his course and endured the cross and scorned its shame. All of these images are coming back to Jesus, and now you can preach. Reason and imagination are just natural. Everybody's got them, believers, unbelievers. They can't save anybody. You can nail it on the reason, you can nail it on the imagination, and nobody will get saved because reason is the bones, that fixed structure, and imagination is the muscle on those bones, but it's the Spirit that has to light it up and give it life. And so let's pray that God would give us the ability and that he'd give the growth.